Welcome to the Women in Vinyl podcast with Jen DiEugenio, founder of Women in Vinyl, and contributor Robin Raymond. This podcast facilitates conversations with those working in the vinyl record industry to educate, demystify, and diversify the vinyl community.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 31 of the Women in Vinyl podcast. You just heard Blue Moon by Time and the Bell of Portland, Oregon, a musical project of intimate, dreamy folk pop off their record O Solfrino. Huge thanks to Alyssa and Mandy and Nadine Records for the use of the song. We're joined today by Justin Perkins, an audio engineer specializing in mastering music and sweetening audio for short video productions. After working at several recording studios in Wisconsin, including Smart Studios, Simple Studios, and a handful of others from the late 90s to the early 2000s, he opened his own mastering studio in 2009 called Mystery Room Mastering out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Justin also writes articles for the Pro Audiophiles and has several other great white papers, one of which, Vinyl Recommendations, spawned this conversation. Check the show notes to read the whole thing. Justin, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. There's no shortage of middle-aged white dudes on the internet with opinions about vinyl, but I figured it's your podcast, so you can have anyone you want on it, whether it's women or not. So here we are.
Yeah, I mean, we loved your white paper / manifesto and are trying to start this year's or this season's podcast with breaking down some misconceptions and misinformation, and we appreciated the shout out at the end of that as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got it.
No problem.
I got a double shout out. So
you did.
I'm duly impressed.
Yeah. Well, I felt like I had written enough, and take it from I really liked the episode you did with Jet Galindo. I pretty much agreed with everything she said, and I was like, well, listen. Don't just take it from me. Listen, here's a second opinion, but from someone that actually cuts, lacquer and is doing it too. So it's kind of like a reinforcement of, what I was already saying. And, I send people to your podcast often, that want to deep dive into vinyl.
That's awesome.
The world of vinyl.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah. So for everybody, this is Justin Perkins of Mystery Room Mastering in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So yeah, we are doing this season is the Flamin' Hot Cheetos version of the Women in Vinyl podcast, where we are talking about hot takes and spicy takes and spicy topics that generally a lot of people have opinions, whether they are ill-formed or completely well-researched, and they live them. We obviously came across your little white paper that you put on your mysteryroommastering.com, and we wanted to get you to expound on it a little bit.
Yeah.
Speak the truth to the people.
So for those that haven't read it, it's called Navigating the Vinyl Manufacturing Process. And I think for those of us in the industry, we thought it was super welcome. I mean, I know I have iClips that are constantly just like, here's this link again, here's this info again. Mm-hmm. So what was the thing that was sort of the breaking point, or that made you really feel like I have to put this out there, because you found that you were explaining it the most?
Yeah, well, a few years ago, I wrote a shorter kind of general article for the Pro Audiophiles website about kind of the importance of lacquer cutting, because bands were getting their test pressings and not loving it and wondering why. And I kind of touched on it, but honestly, I think it was earlier this year, a client of mine was really into his project, and he's like, I read that article that you wrote, and I'm like, wow, I didn't know if anyone ever read that. Read that because in my in the email I send for the Vinyl Master, there's a link, if you want to learn more about what's going to happen after it leaves my hands, you read this article. And I was like, wow, I didn't know anyone actually clicked on those links and read that stuff, so I should make a better one maybe. And with the Pro Audiophiles, I didn't really want to endorse any other certain companies and things and people because it's more of a general article. But I found that I was writing the same email over and over to my clients, when they ask who do I recommend for vinyl, and it was kind of evolving a little bit, a little bit before the pandemic and certainly during the pandemic. My email was kind of evolving based on who's the least backed up and things like that. And so I just thought, let me just put everything in one place. And originally I was thinking of making it more of a private page on the website where, I can put it in my email templates and my clients can find it. But I decided to make it a little more public. It's still slightly hidden on a different page, but you can find it on the website pretty easily. So yeah, basically just wanted something that I can just link people to when their project is done or when they're waiting for me to finish it and deciding who to use for vinyl, because it's a big decision and it's not inexpensive to get vinyl made, to generally speaking. So I want people to be happy with the result.
Did you find that it really evolved over the last time that you wrote it to when you rewrote it?
Yeah, well, the email is what was evolving, the private email that I was sending to clients, and I was kind of rewriting it or trying to find the last person I sent it to and copying and pasting it and then seeing if anything had changed. And I was like, this is getting ridiculous. I should just make a web page with links to stuff and kind of spell it all out. And it was long overdue. I'm glad I did it. And again, I wasn't sure if I was going to share it publicly, but my website guy made it look kind of nice on the website, and he formatted it nicely, and it actually looked presentable. I'm like, okay, I think this is worth sharing. It's good to have new posts and content, as they say, once in a while. So I just thought I would share it. I didn't know if anyone, what would happen with it, but some other people in the industry, some other cutting engineers and people that runs record labels started sharing it. So it took off a little bit. It got a lot of traffic, and it's something I can just keep updating. And again, since it's on my website, I'm comfortable giving out, specific places or names that I've worked with personally. That I've had good results with.
Well, I mean, and you've done over 1,000 records. So I feel like you have a pretty good understanding of where you've had good results. So, I mean,
yeah. And, like I said, it started out as, why do some of these records not sound amazing? And I learned a lot, this is probably more like 10 years ago, but, sometimes I think back to when I was in like the late 90s, our high school band, we put out a 7-inch, and I have no idea how that got made. I mean, I technically mastered it because I was the last person that touched it, but it was a split 7-inch with two different bands, and I have no idea what their side sounded like or how loud it was compared to ours. And whoever cut it probably had to do some adjusting. This is before the internet. It just kind of blows my mind how stuff got done back then. But again, then in the 2000s, I'm mastering more, and bands are doing more and more vinyl and having questions, just the typical stuff, like one person thinks the record is the wrong speed, but it's their turntable that's the problem. And the issue is you can relate to that
currently. Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
Robin was just having that issue.
Well, I mean, and I think the reason it happens, in my opinion, is because if you go buy someone's album and you put it on, you just listen to it and enjoy it, you have no idea what the original master sounds like. But when you're working on your own album and hearing it digitally over and over for a long time, through the recording, mixing, then suddenly you hear the vinyl, you're really sensitive to any pitch and speed changes. And you're like, this is, the timbre is a little different on the voices and instruments. You're like, something's not right. And then that's when you realize, well, at first you think it's your test pressing and freak out, and then you
Yes,
realize
exactly. Yeah, it's
maybe
always got
my
to be the record's
turntable,
problem.
yeah, maybe my turntable is not super accurate. So, learning how to kind of politely navigate those things that come up, and say, do some troubleshooting, to the point where now I have a kind of insane turntable that lets me, and in fact, this morning I just did it. I met one of my clients last night at a show and got their test pressing and made a recording this morning of it, and sent them, a digital transfer of the recording I did here so they can compare with what they've been hearing on their table. And
That's actually a great segue to one of the questions that we had was like, I find a lot of times when people have an issue with their test press, it almost feels like a he said, she said type situation where it's like this endless loop of like, well, it wasn't me who was cutting it. Well, it wasn't us who were plating it. Well, it's not us who are pressing it. So, I mean, do you see that happening often, and how would you advise someone to maybe get to the bottom of it from their side?
I do see it happening. It tends to happen, and I know you talked about this with Jet, but when you have a vinyl broker involved, and like she said, brokers can be great for some people that need a little hand holding through the process. If you want to make one phone call, get the whole record, the sleeves, the artwork, the cutting, all done under one person, that's great. They're kind of like your general contractor. But that's when you can kind of get in situations where the broker has to now call a variety of people to see kind of where the issue is. But when you are kind of working with a pressing plant that who's cutting it, or hiring your own cutting engineer, I have some clients that they hire their own cutting engineer, their own plating and pressing plant, so they know all the ins and outs and how things work. And that's a lot easier to get to the bottom of whatever the problem is, because I find that the people doing the work don't necessarily point fingers, because they can't really hide at that point, but the vinyl broker can kind of just
navigate the waters.
Yeah, but they can also muddy the waters too and be like, I don't know, and I think it sounds fine, and I got to wait a week for someone to respond, kind of thing. So it just kind of slows down the process when there's an issue.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of like, as a one-stop shop person, which like that is my distinct problem right now that I'm still kind of trying to deal with. There's a label that I did a test cut for, and like I think that's the genius part of being a lathe cutter, because I can be like, here you go, and it doesn't have to be plated, and like nothing has to really happen. I just send out the record, and I'm like, I welcome your feedback, because I always do. But the feedback that I got was completely bizarre. It was, it seems like you've pitched it up. It's 6 BPM too fast, and it's in mono. And I was like, what?
Yeah, it can be challenging and again, that's kind of why I just got this turntable set up, so I can just transfer it here. I don't even set up the table. I hire a guy from the Chicago area. He comes up maybe once a year and calibrates everything and sets it up. So it's really well tuned up, and it's kind of just a great second or third opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely my next move, is to get some sort of a USB something, transfer something, so I can just be like, all right, well, here's what it sounds like in my room, and this is why.
I think that started to get more popular, like when the lacquer place burned down. People didn't have as many
options for references.
So like they're just cutting one or two songs on a section of lacquer and doing a digital transfer rather than sending actual test lacquer through the mail or UPS to the client. But in a way, it's kind of nice because it rules out any incorrectly set up turntables.
Yeah, and that's my biggest thing, because like going back and forth with the label, and I mean that's like the most disappointing thing for me too, is that they've essentially ghosted me after I said, like, did you play the record on a few different turntables to get as much accuracy as possible, and so that they've like abdicated from the process. And I'm like, well, I could send you another.
That's a standard response. Like they should totally do that. Yeah,
totally. I was like, I could send you another test record, but if your turntable set up inappropriately, like you're going to reject it too.
So
So
where do we think that the disconnect is happening? Like, is it happening where we as manufacturers, engineers somehow need to dispense this information better, or do you think it's the customer, or both?
That's a good question. I can't remember which place it is, but there's one place that I see test pressings from that has a nice on the vinyl on the jacket. It has a nice kind of pair. It's the whole thing, like what you should listen for, things
mhm,
like that. Kind of, it's really cool because it's right on the jacket, so whoever's listening to it can't say they didn't see the information.
right.
And I think that's a really cool thing. And I'm surprised more places don't do that. I mean, I'm not usually facilitating the order, so I don't know if when the clients received the package there was a note or they got an email about it. But that's one thing that I think is great. Is that whatever company has it right on the sleeve, it's perfect.
Yeah.
And my client actually did the right thing. It was over the weekend, and they said, "Sounds really weird. We want you to check there. We have questions." But then they found a couple friends that had turntables, and like, oh, actually, it sounds awesome. It was the needle on our turntable.
Sure, yeah.
And then they just had one other like question about one of the songs. The last song on side B had some extra noise, but it's the last song on the side and the quieter
Right.
song. So it all kind of checked out, but it was kind of all the classic panic touch
Initial
points.
panic, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think, and again, I could even do another article that focuses on how to listen to a test pressing and what to look for.
Yeah.
But I do think if pressing plants aren't giving instructions on how to listen to a test pressing and what in troubleshooting steps, I think that could save a lot of headache back at the office. Put probably have less fires to put out every day or every week.
For sure.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
noticed. Oh, go ahead, Jen.
I was gonna say, yeah, that and managing expectations of how their music sounds on vinyl, I think is another
Yeah,
thing
totally.
that would be helpful across the board. I mean, if you have really soft, wispy music or things like that, there is going to be some surface noise potentially, and uh, there can be a lot of complaints
Yeah.
Yeah,
along
and
that as well.
it's all trade-offs, and I'm sure most people listening to this by now know. But I mean, if you have longer sides, then they got to cut it a little quieter, which means the noise floor appears louder.
Well, and that was
Uh,
going to be something that I was going to ask you, Justin, because I'm seeing it more and more and more. And I don't know if it's just because people are being more ambitious with their sound lengths or their side lengths, or if it's like an unrealistic expectation. Because like even Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which is supposed to be played in its entirety, comes in at like 38 minutes total. And that's like a opus, right?
yeah.
But like I like my comfortable maximum side length is like 1930 on an LP. What are you like? What kind of side lengths are you seeing that you're setting up to be cut?
Well, it's all over the place. I mean, the one that I keep talking about had like 17-minute sides, so in
Yeah,
theory, it should have sounded awesome, and it actually did.
yeah,
You know, I hate to be like, I feel like I'm always the bad guy when a band has like a 22 or 23-minute side, and I have to say, just so you know, I'm not saying you have to remove a song or cut, edit a song, but you're at that point where you're kind of trading quality versus content. Do we need to
hmm,
have
Hmm.
all this material on? Is it more important to have all the material on there, or is sound quality more important? Because you're at
right,
that tipping point and there's really no way to, tell them exactly how much worse it's going to sound if they go 24 minutes.
yeah,
I would just say, the shorter the side, the better it's going to sound. And then basically everything in the article about, knowing who's cutting it,
hmm,
sometimes putting your softer songs at the end of sides,
yeah,
helps, things like that, instead of the biggest, densest song, which can be a problem because sometimes some albums end with big, huge,
totally,
kind of climaxes, and with no problem on digital, but on vinyl, it's not always a problem. But if it's a 23-minute side and it's a huge ending, that can be a problem. And
yeah,
managing expectations is a good way to put it. It's just, there's going to be a little surface noise. And this is something that I wish I knew more about, but I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I keep hearing, how, sometimes test press things are a little noisier because the press hasn't heated up to its optimal temperature.
yeah.
And
Sometimes, for sure.
It's You have to like break in the stampers a little bit too.
Yeah.
You know, like they have to get into a rhythm on the press. So when you're swapping those out, because it could
Yeah.
depend. Some people run test pressings on certain days for certain periods of time. Other people will swap it in between jobs. So there's a lot of factors at play as far as that goes.
Right. And then
Yeah.
if they're only doing 300 copies, I mean, that's still not a lot of time probably on the press. So does it even get fully warmed up for the majority of those 300 copies? I don't know. I would love to visit a pressing plant sometime and see how fast things happen. But
I
Yeah.
think with like at least with your full run, you have time to get it dialed in. But when you're doing test pressings and you can only run, you know, let's
5 or
say
10.
well, yeah, 5 or 10 that the customer gets, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe a spindle's worth, so 25, 50 to
Yeah.
get your five, that's not necessarily enough to, get it to where it needs to be. So
Yeah.
that's what I usually tell people when they come back with like, well, I'm hearing a little bit of noise here, but it's not on all five, or it's on a couple, but not all of them. I'm like, well, if it's not on all of them, then it's likely, something that we're going to be able to work out. It's just the stamper breaking in. You're looking for to make sure your side splits are correct, everything like
Your track
sounds
order.
right. It's all exactly as you submitted it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I try to tell clients like the test pressing is not really a place to be nitpicking the tone so much. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
there's a major problem, that's a red flag, but it's kind of too late to be, that's really why you get a test cut, a test lacquer cut, or,
Yeah.
make sure you're hiring the right person. Sometimes I feel like I'm the dentist where it's like you're giving advice and no one's listening to it until it's too late, because it's not fun advice, but then they
Totally.
they kind of blow it off and use a cheaper place, and then suddenly they're not happy with their vinyl, and then they wish they would have taken some of that advice. But again, it's kind of too late because they have to start over and they're already into the cost so much. So then you keep it in mind for the next record. Basically, is what happens. I think in a lot of cases, use it
Yeah.
as a learning experience for the next one.
Yeah, which is kind of a bummer. I mean, like you said before, and as we all know, making records is not a cheap and fast endeavor. So you want to be prepared and love what you're going to go forward with before you shell out a bunch of money and wait for a year for your product to come, right?
Yeah. So again, that's kind of the whole point of the article, is to really put this huge red flag in front of people like, hey, you're not making CDs here. You're not
Yeah.
uploading it to a streaming service. This is a really delicate, somewhat complicated process, or at least more complicated than you may think, just in all the steps that are involved. I mean, I think people think everything is done at like the same place, like,
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and
totally.
it's just everything is so kind of broken up into different processes, that it's not, and it's easy for things to go wrong, get damaged, and with the whole, with everyone being so busy, if you're not in great communication with who's cutting it, they're gonna, they may cut it a little on the conservative side to
Mhm.
avoid playback problems, which I totally get. But then that's when you get into, maybe it's slightly more noisy, surface noise than you would like.
They're not as loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you did hire a cutting engineer to do a test cut, you could kind of hear the trade-offs of, okay, it's a little louder, there's less surface noise,
Hmm.
it gets a little crunchier in one or two spots, things like that. You got to decide what you want to, what your trade-offs are, what your expectations are.
So, for someone shopping for a pressing plant, what are the top 5 questions you would tell them to ask?
Well, I would tell them to ask, if they're going to be open about who's going to be doing the lacquer cutting. I don't want to name any names, but there's a few that don't really inform you of who's cutting the lacquers
Hmm.
or give you a choice. And I just think it's good to know who's cutting them, because you can kind of look up their work and potentially communicate with them if needed, and it becomes a more open and honest, kind of transaction. Whereas if they're just kind of blindly farming it out to whoever's least busy, that's not always the greatest for your. It doesn't always, turn out bad, but it's not the greatest approach if you're really concerned about sound quality. So,
Hmm.
and I even know of a vinyl broker in my area that's very open about who they use for cutting, because they understand that that's important to the process.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
And as far as the other things, I mean, you may know more, I mean, you obviously know more than me, but just turnaround time. And I don't really get into the whole packaging side of things. It's not really my area of interest or expertise. I wouldn't even know what to look for or what to ask when it comes to artwork and packaging. But I'm sure those things would factor into it too. How thick cardboard going to be, colors and things like that. I know
Yeah.
that can.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things that I appreciated in your piece was kind of about, short turn times. You might question if someone's able to do it super fast. Why? Like, what is the reasoning for it? Did they get new machines or are they just not busy? Like, what,
Yeah.
Because
Well,
turn times are long right now everywhere. So,
yeah. I mean, this is not 100% true, but my blanket statement is like anyone that's doing amazing work is probably really backed up right now, unless there are some new pressing plants coming up. Every year there's one or two that seem to come online, and they're kind of by nature going to be a little less backed up because they don't have like a steady flow, but they probably will very soon. But unless it's a new pressing plant, they're probably very busy if they're doing great work. And that's just the way it is, to the point where some of them probably aren't even taking new customers, things like that.
Yeah, there's
Some
a lot of people closing books this year.
so we have talked about vinyl brokers some, but like the good, the bad, and the ugly. So
Without name dropping.
Yeah.
Unless you want to. Some of the spicy takes.
I don't want to drop any names, but I do think it's a little bit shady when vinyl brokers put their own labels on the records, because they didn't really
do anything,
make the records. They made some phone calls and emails.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of bands and artists don't realize that their stuff is likely getting made in a whole nother country. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's traveling far.
Yeah.
There's lines of communication are really stretched there for troubleshooting. And that's kind of where I think it gets a little questionable, is when they're putting their own stickers on it, like we made this. And I just think would be better if they were more open and honest about it. But again, vinyl broker, I've had some clients that I know are going to need a ton of hand holding, and it's too much work for them to navigate everything. So then maybe a vinyl broker is great for them, because they can just work with one person that's going to handle all their questions, whether it's artwork, audio, shipping, things like that. So the vinyl brokers do have a place. I just think I wish some of them would be a little more open about what's happening. And I think I mentioned this in the article, but usually a pressing plant has pictures of people making records and having a great time and really proud of what they're doing. And you see the machines, and then the vinyl brokers tend to just have price lists and colors, and
right.
It talks about how they can do CDs, cassettes, t-shirts, USB sticks. I mean, the odds of a place being able to do all that stuff themselves under one roof is pretty low. They've got to be farming at least some of that out.
Yeah, and I know from my perspective, I help a lot of people through all of those things too, as not a broker. So there are pressing plants that are happy to still take clients and serve people that are newer to the process as well. Yeah,
I know a lot of pressing plants that have really great customer service. There was one that I don't want to name, but it wasn't that long ago where they were still making people send in their audio on a CDR. And
wow.
Why are we reducing the audio to CD quality when it can be cut from high resolution files that don't need to be sent through the mail? That takes time, and then stuff can get damaged. It's very bizarre. And it wasn't all that long ago, and they finally, I think, understood that that's a silly thing, and they changed. But there was a point in time where I didn't recommend that place simply because of that alone. I'm like, you're telling me that once we're done with this, I gotta burn a CD, reduce it to CD quality for no reason, burn a CD, package it up, go ship it.
Yeah.
When any other place can just accept download link or upload the high resolution files to their server and cut it from that. I mean, that's So things like that, I don't know how I got on that topic, but a lot of pressing plants are very, helpful about navigating the process as well. And there are pressing plants I know of that either use the same cutting engineer for every job, so that makes things simple, or they're very open about who they're using, or give you a choice. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I've had managers of artists tell me that they really don't care how the vinyl sounds, because they feel like most of the artist fans are going to just buy it and get it autographed and hang it up and maybe not ever listen to it. So they're they're not too concerned with sound quality. And then you get the whole opposite side where someone freaks out about one little tick or pop in the test pressing, and they're having a meltdown about it. So I mean, the expectations are all over the map, but it's a cool format. It's enjoyable to listen to. I like to put vinyl on when I'm doing computer stuff, especially when I'm doing things that involve restarting the computer, because I can just keep listening to vinyl and the music doesn't turn off. Things like that. But yeah, I don't know. There's so much to it that's why I had to do the article, and I'm glad that people were reading it. And for those that want to know, it really spells out how much effort can I really put into this. And there's so many details there if you want to know about them, but a lot of people also don't have the patience or bandwidth for it. But I wanted people to at least be aware that things can go amazing, things can go wrong, and here's what you should be aware of when you're doing your record, because it's different than CDs.
Yeah, I mean, it's just nice to have somebody else kind of echoing the same statements as us. I mean, I never speak for Jen, but I know that I get pushback being like, well, what do you know? Like, you're new to the industry and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. But I've done a lot of research and I feel pretty well informed with what I do on the daily.
Right. If you do the job day in and day out.
Yeah. But to have somebody that has done as many records as you, and I mean, like your association with Steinberg and Wave Lab, and it's not like you're a new dude on the block that's trying to be famous on YouTube. Like your takes are very well informed. I was really glad to read it, and I was kind of like,
really just out of necessity. Because I mean, when you look back, this is before my time, but the music people were making was kind of for vinyl. It was kind of like the digital limiting, the CD loudness stuff. That's also when vinyl started to become less popular. So very few people were making vinyl. It never really died in like the punk scene. People were still doing vinyl, but I think when vinyl started coming back and its upswing in the 2000s, people were realizing that these really loud CD masters we're making, they just don't sound great on vinyl. And why is that? And then kind of the art of the vinyl pre-master started to evolve. I mean, in the 80s and even in the 90s, a lot of times it was the same master that was used for all formats. There really wasn't such a thing. But then as people became more critical of vinyl too and expected more out of it, it was like, well, what can we do to get the best sounding vinyl? And then it's like, well, if we don't send a brick wall square wave into the lathe, probably going to sound better. And I don't necessarily think vinyl always sounds better you can't really say vinyl always sounds better than digital, but sometimes I'll buy a record on vinyl because, or at least I'm hoping that it was cut from something that wasn't a brick wall, because that can get kind of political. But there's some great records out there, but the artist or producer made the digital master so squashed it's kind of fatiguing to listen to because it's just a brick wall. And then sometimes the vinyl version is cut from a more dynamic and less squashed version. And again, it's not that it's on vinyl that I think it's great, but
it's just a better treatment of the actual vinyl.
It's not screaming at me the entire time. And the other thing too, I'm starting to do a lot of 20th anniversary records for stuff from that era, late 90s, early 2000s. And the CD master was kind of the king, and that's what everyone went with. But I mean, vinyl, it's one of those things where there's so many scenarios that can come up like that, where it's a existing album. I feel like a lot of 90s records are coming out in deluxe versions that are now double LP, because they know that people are going to buy it. There's an audience for it now, and it's not a experimental new release that they hope sells. I've gotten a number of projects from younger bands that have never done vinyl, and they submit a project form and they check the little vinyl box. Then I look at the runtime and it's like 55 minutes, and then I have to have the conversation of like, sorry, I'm giving you bad news here, but it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, it's like one of the first 2 questions that I ask anytime anybody sends me an inquiry, and I'm like, what's your runtime? And then I'll tell you what's up. But like, but it's just like an inappropriate understanding of the medium too, where it's like they don't know how they think a 10 minutes can go on a 7-inch, and I'm like, no ma'am, like that, you don't want to do that at all. Holy crap, don't even get me started on 7s and 40, how they should only be 45s, but like it's problematic with that.
And I'll get pushback. Someone will be like, well, I have a Pink Floyd album that's got like a 27-minute side. I'm like, well, you know what? Pink Floyd was using the best, most expensive, everything, unlimited budget. And also, you don't know how much better it could have sounded if it was only 19-minute side. Your only reference point is that. And it's fine. It's just all trade-offs. And
you're actually, I can't say the band, but
I can't say the name, but there's a software company that's making, there's something that already exists. I think it's called Perfect Groove.
It is, yeah.
There's someone that's making something like that, but a little even, I think, cooler and more useful for the average mastering engineer to kind of predict, what the grooves are going to look like and how closely you can pack them. And I think that's going to help people like myself and even cutting engineers, figure out how well things are going to work on vinyl before you actually make a cut. And it'll probably be out within the next few months to a year. I have a version of it that works, but it's not ready for public release yet.
Hold that thought. It's time for an Amanda Fact.
Sound has been recorded onto numerous different carriers over the years. The word carrier refers to the object that holds the sound recording. Vinyl records are, in the archival world, referred to as a carrier. We now know that all carriers, except one, developed since the start of recorded sound, contain inherent vice. Inherent vice is not just a clever book and movie title. It is a term that refers to some intrinsic component of an object that is inherently unstable and will inevitably cause deterioration or complete degradation. Vinyl records that we all buy at the record store today are the only sound carrier that is considered archivally sound or shelf stable. This means that you can leave it on a shelf for 40 years and come back, and it will still play the sound like the day it was put on the shelf. Every other format or carrier has its own quirk or pain point. For example, tapes use a binder that is used as an adhesive to keep magnetic particles attached. This binder breaks down over time. Sound literally falls off the tape in the form of little black specks. CDs suffer from bit rot, which refers to when pieces of information essentially evaporate into thin air as the digital information breaks down on the surface. But the saying, vinyl is forever, is actually true on multiple levels. As long as you have a working record player, you will always be able to play your records. This is another reason you should take care of them. They can actually be a family heirloom.
Are you a producer, engineer, or broadcaster? Do you want to be? Either way, Nugent Audio is for you. Nugent creates innovative, intuitive, professional audio tools for high-end music producers, post-production engineers, and broadcasters. Their products make it easier to deliver better quality, save time, and reduce cost. As a Women in Vinyl podcast listener, you get 20% off your Nugent Audio purchase using code WOMENINVINYL. Go to nugentaudio.com/womeninvinyl. And now, back to the episode. One thing before we sort of wrap up is you mentioned Mobineko as a
Mhm.
plan B, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you know that they do and why they might be a good option for people.
Yeah, it's interesting. The guy that does my website also has a small record label, and he's in some kind of Facebook group for small record label people.
Oh,
And he
cute.
came across Mob and Neko in that group and tried it out on a release, a very small release. So it's a good experiment. He's like, "Hey, I found out about this place called Mob and Neko, and I'm going to use it." And then I went to the website and I thought it was really cool that you can choose from a handful of cutting engineers. Two of them were that I recognized the name
Mhm.
of, and I thought that was really cool compared to like a vinyl. I hate to keep talking vinyl brokers, but a vinyl broker where you get no choices basically. So he did it through Mabineko. It came back relatively quickly. This is a little bit before everything got extremely backed up, and I was really impressed with the sound quality. And but it was also an oddball record. It was like synthesizer music.
Mm.
It wasn't like full band playing or anything. So it's a little bit strange. So he did a couple more through Mabineko, and they kept coming back sounding. I was being a little pessimistic, but it exceeded my expectations with sound quality.
Nice.
And I don't know how they're doing it or what they're doing, and maybe one of you or both of you know a little more, but I believe their presses are in Taiwan.
Yeah,
But they have a U.S. cutting engineer, Levi from Black Belt. There's someone in the U.K. and there's a couple other ones that I just don't know the names. I'm sure they do good work. I just don't know anything about them.
yeah, we're hoping to eventually get Richard on the podcast because they're doing really quick turn stuff too, short run, quick turn, but pressing. So I'm really curious to learn more about their operation because they sort of just popped up out of nowhere, and I have been hearing good things as well.
Yeah, and I've exchanged some emails with them, and yeah, the Express one, it's some kind of press that they designed themselves, or it's a new thing. It's a kind of a new way of doing it, which I wish I knew more. So hopefully you can have them on to talk about it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
With the Express option, you understandably don't get to pick who cuts it because they just don't have. They probably just want to get it through as quickly as possible because it's Express. But with their normal ordering system, you can pick who cuts it, and they're still relatively fast. So that's why I tell people, and I feel bad calling it a plan B, but it's a little bit just more of a Express option. But I'm I'm increasingly and continuously, impressed with the results. So I may have to reword that. It's just kind of like you said, it's a newer operation, did kind of come out of nowhere, but I'm pretty impressed with the results. In fact, I'm telling some of my favorite bands and clients to use them because some of the usual suspects that do great work, are quoting a year out, and that's just not realistic for some people.
Yeah.
Some people don't really have a
Right.
deadline because they're not doing shows anymore, and it'll come out when it's ready. But other people that want to have it for a certain tour or event or things like that, then I'm really confident recommending Mabineko because I've just been impressed with everything. I haven't heard a bad record from them, basically, and their customer service seems pretty on point. I don't really communicate with pressing plants, but one of my clients is a little bit, I don't want to say needy, but has a lot of questions, and they were very, responsive to his questions, and to the point where he said he was happy with it. So if he said he was happy with it, then they must be have good customer service.
Yeah. The name also translates to mobile cat, which I appreciate.
I did not know that. Mobile cat. I wonder why they picked that name then, because they're not really mobile or have anything to do with cats. But
Well, to wrap up, Robin, do you want to ask our question?
Yeah. So, Justin, because you're obviously a fan of podcasts, duh, you've probably heard the random question that we asked most of our guests.
I know what it's going to be, and I feel really stupid for not thinking ahead of what.
That's my favorite. I love it when people say that because it's much like I love it that it's off the cuff because then you get your most authentic answer. But because you're a mastering engineer, you could also probably just create your own specialized 7-inch record. So if you could, I mean, and you were very, very diplomatic in not mentioning what your band name was that you made a bunch of 7-inch records for. So I would love to know what that is, because I would like to see if it's on the Discogs somewhere.
I don't know if it is on Discogs. A friend of mine found it at a record store somewhere on the West Coast and sent me a picture.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I don't think I want to name it because it's that bad. It's so bad. I can send you a link to something that's less bad, that's not as old, but
awesome. I would love that.
That one is bad, very bad.
But if you could make your own custom 7-inch, what would that 7-inch record have on its A and B side?
Man, that is extremely tough, and I'm so dumb for not thinking of this, because I do listen to the podcast and I've heard other people struggle with this.
Yeah, it is a struggle, man. It's one of those. It's better than the island, like the desert island question, I think. Though.
Yeah, I'm just gonna have to be honest. I don't have a great answer for you right now. I am so busy with music, other people's music, that I don't get to listen to much music. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yep.
In the times when my ears aren't occupied with music. I don't know. I'm gonna be totally lame and not have a great answer for you. I mean, I do enjoy listening to jazz, which sounds kind of lame, but what I like about it is there's no lyrics, and I don't know how to play it. Like, I can play music. I started as a bass player, but I don't understand jazz at all. Like, I can listen to a lot of pop songs and pick out the chord progression. And things like that, but jazz, it's like this whole different language, and I have no idea. And that allows me to enjoy it as a listener, because I'm not really thinking about anything technical or musical.
So who's your jazz guy?
Well, the big one that came off of Record Store Day is this Art Pepper release. It was one of the Record Store Day releases. We're listening to a lot of that. You helped with that?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Awesome.
It got on some of the audio board nerds, it got like extremely high praise, to the point where I paid way too much money for it after Record Store Day, because I didn't actually get it on Record Store Day. But that was like the home run of this past Record Store Day, is the Art Pepper one. So nice work on that.
Yeah, it's through Omnivore Records. Cheryl is the owner of that label, and she is fantastic.
Nice.
Yeah, she's also from Milwaukee, although she and I are a little bit apart in age, where I didn't know her in her Milwaukee days, but I have done some work with her in more recent times, now that she's in Oregon now, but when she was in California. So yeah, nice. I didn't know that Cheryl was involved with it. That's crazy. So yeah, basically just a lot of the classic jazz stuff is fun to listen to in the studio when I'm not, actually working on stuff. So it'd probably be some either a podcast or jazz I would put on. Kind of weird, but I've heard all my favorite music enough where I don't need to hear it again.
That's fair.
Awesome.
And your podcast, of course, is great.
Obviously,
I didn't know there was so much one could talk about with vinyl, but I guess I should have known better. But it's been a cool resource to link people to. Like I said, I'll get that kind of client where they're going to do vinyl in the coming months, and I say, well, if you should take in some of these episodes and get some deeper dives into all things vinyl, whether the packaging, the audio,
we super appreciate
the process, the expectations to be aware of. It's not something you can explain in a couple sentences.
It's true. Totally. Thankfully, because this would be a really boring podcast if we could explain it all in a couple of minutes. Do you have a release that is coming out right now that you're excited about, Justin?
Well, I've done
that
a lot
you
of
can
stuff.
talk about.
I've done a lot of stuff for the Replacements, who are from Minnesota.
Awesome.
One of my favorite bands, and lucky to actually start working with them on a lot of their reissues. And we're about to start another one. I can't actually say the name of it because they like to keep it a surprise for the fans. Kind of like how Bob Dylan is just kind of randomly reissuing his records in no particular order. That kind of thing. Yeah. So we're not going in order. We're just picking and choosing.
Cool.
I just did do you know Ricky Lee Jones?
I don't.
Mm-mm.
She's well, maybe that's a bad one, but I like kind of doing this stuff where she's like a blues folk singer, and she had kind of an obscure record in the 90s where she did like some trip hop looping stuff back when it wasn't real popular, and you wouldn't expect that from her. So that's been a fun one. That's something I just finished up, just because it's not on the streaming services, but it's also 57 minutes, so it's probably not going to be on vinyl.
Right.
But at least it'll be on the streaming services. But
awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Justin.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
No problem. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for doing such a great podcast too. It's an awesome resource that, again, I point a lot of people to that want a deeper dive into vinyl.
Well, and for all of you technical-minded people out there, Justin does a lot with WaveLab, and I've learned tremendously a lot of mastering things because you explain things in such a way that it makes sense to me, and I really appreciate that. So,
well, that's good to hear. Like I said, I don't do it to be famous. I just honestly was getting so many questions. I'm like, I better just make videos so that when it's 3 a.m. and someone's stuck, then they can just watch this and solve their problem.
Well,
that's
I mean,
awesome.
And that's the thing. You're the guy that's speaking truth everywhere you go. So whether it's white papers or YouTube or whatever, it's awesome. It's always a very balanced and measured understanding of things, and I super appreciate it. So
well, maybe I should cool it a little bit then, but I'm glad you appreciate it. But
no way.
Dial it back a little bit.
Content. More spicy takes. I had a lot of people ask me about what I thought of your article too. So I was pumped. I love it. I love it when we get the community talking. It's my favorite thing. So and
I found a lot of times it's stuff I wasn't trying to do any of that. I just wanted to put something together. Sometimes it's the stuff you're not trying to do that ends up taking off a little more. And then if you try to actually write something that's going to take off, it just goes nowhere. So that's how it goes. But anyways, I know it's been a long day for everyone, so let you go, but thanks for chatting, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks, man.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate you.
All right, have a good evening.
Thanks.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Women in Vinyl podcast. You can join our ever-growing list of sponsors: other record labels, Selector, Couple Design, Eargasm, Groove Washer, Glowtronics, New Gen Audio, and Vinyl Revolution Record Show. And thanks for sponsoring the show. Hey, as always, you can join our conversation on Instagram or send us a note at media@womeninvinyl.com. Clock us, send us info. If you have a question, we got the answer, or we'll find it. We won't lie to you. And check out womeninvinyl.com for past episodes, the store, the job board, and the library of resources. Don't forget to like and subscribe and give us a review on your favorite podcast delivery method. You can also contribute to furthering our mission at patreon.com/womeninvinyl. Hey, guess what? This episode, 45 minutes. You know there was more. You want more? You get more. Go to patreon.com and you can get more. And you'll find all the B-sides, the deep cuts, and the amazing extras, including longer episodes, and contribute to the creation of scholarships and educational opportunities to further the demystification, the infiltration of more women and non-binary identifying humans into the vinyl making space, decreasing those turnaround times every week. Yeah, we love your records. We want you to love them too. womeninvinyl.com.
This episode has been brought to you by Women in Vinyl and Red Spade Records. Thank you for listening. Please remember to subscribe, and you can always contact us directly by visiting www.womeninvinyl.com.